in 1987, trawling in the English Channel. He later realized looked like the kind of airplane that Glenn Miller disappeared in.
On December 15, 1944, the legendary bandleader Glenn Miller vanished without a trace, leaving the world to speculate for decades. Was it bad weather, mechanical failure, or something far more sinister? Today, we uncover the real story behind his disappearance, exploring secret missions, potential espionage, and new evidence that might finally close this historic case. From his rise to fame to the enigmatic final flight, join us as we reveal the truths and dispel the myths about Glenn Miller's untimely end. To get the full understanding of the case, we need to go back and start from beginning. Born Alton Glenn Miller in Clarinda, Iowa, the iconic bandleader adopted the name Glenn with a double N during his high school years. This name change wasn't just for show, though. It served both legal and military purposes throughout his life. He went by Alton G. Miller on official documents like his military records, driver's license, and tax returns. Miller's musical journey began early on. After earning enough money from milking cows, he bought his first trombone and joined the town orchestra in Grant City, Missouri. He was a multi-instrumentalist, playing cornet and mandolin as well, but the trombone eventually became his instrument of choice. In 1918, the Miller family moved to Fort Morgan, Colorado, where Glenn attended high school. He was a well-rounded student, excelling in sports, particularly football, and even serving as an editor for the school yearbook for 2 years. His name was spelled both Glenn and Glenn in these yearbooks, adding another layer to his evolving identity. By the time he graduated high school in 1921, Miller had his sights set on a professional music career. He had already tasted the excitement of performing and was determined to make it his life's work. Little did he know that his musical journey would lead him to become one of the most iconic band leaders of all time. In 1923, Miller entered the University of Colorado at Boulder, where he joined the Sigma Nu fraternity. But his passion for music couldn't be contained by the classroom walls. He spent most of his time attending auditions and playing gigs with bands like Boyd Centers in Denver. After failing most of his classes, including harmony, he realized that his true calling was music, not academia. He dropped out of college and set his sights on a professional music career. Miller's journey led him to New York City, where he immersed himself in the Schillinger system, a unique method for composing and arranging music. It was under the tutelage of Joseph Schillinger that he composed Miller's tune, later renamed Moonlight Serenade. This iconic melody would become his signature theme, a timeless piece that captured the essence of his musical style. In 1926, Miller hit the road, touring with various bands and eventually landing a coveted spot in Ben Pollock's orchestra in Los Angeles. He also played for Victor Young, learning from some of the best musicians in the business. Miller started as the main trombone soloist, but when the talented Jack Teagarden joined the band, his solos were drastically cut. This setback, however, led Miller to realize his true strength lay in arranging and composing, not just playing. He even published a songbook in 1928 called 125 Jazz Breaks for Trombone, showcasing his expertise in arranging music for his instrument. During his time with Pollock, Miller wrote several arrangements, including his first composition, Room 1411, co-written with Benny Goodman, a rising star in the jazz world. In 1928, when the band moved to New York City, Miller reunited with his college sweetheart, Helen Berger, and they got married. He then joined Red Nichols Orchestra, known as Red Nichols and His Five Pennies, where he played in the pit bands for Broadway shows like Strike Up the Band and Girl Crazy. The band was full of talented musicians, including the legendary Benny Goodman and Gene Krupa. Miller's career was gaining momentum, and he was quickly becoming a sought-after arranger and composer. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, Glenn Miller was a busy bee, freelancing as a trombonist for various bands. He even played alongside other jazz legends like Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, and Joe Venuti in a star-studded orchestra. He also wrote and arranged music for the Dorsey brothers, composing catchy tunes like Annie's Cousin Fanny and Tomorrow's Another Day. In 1935, Miller got a chance to shine when he put together an American orchestra for British bandleader Ray Noble. This was where he developed his signature sound, using a lead clarinet over 4 saxophones, a style that would become synonymous with his own big band later on. Miller even made a cameo appearance in the movie The Big Broadcast of 1936 as part of the Ray Noble Orchestra. The film also featured performances by Dorothy Dandridge and the Nicholas brothers, who would later collaborate with Miller on 2 other movies. In 1937, Miller took a leap of faith and formed his own band. But it didn't quite take off as he had hoped. The band struggled to stand out from the countless other bands of the era, and after a disappointing run, they called it quits in 1938. Even the legendary Benny Goodman tried to offer encouragement to a dejected Miller, telling him, "I don't know, Glenn, you just stay with it." After the disappointing end of his first band, Glenn Miller didn't give up on his musical dreams. He knew he needed something special to stand out in the crowded music scene. He decided to experiment with a unique sound, featuring the clarinet playing the melody alongside a tenor saxophone playing the same note an octave lower, while the other saxophones harmonized within a single octave. It was a bold and innovative approach that would soon become his trademark. George T. Simon, a music manager, stumbled upon a talented saxophonist named Wilbur Schwartz. Miller hired him, but instead of playing the saxophone, he had Schwartz play the lead clarinet. This new blend of sounds became Miller's secret weapon, setting his band apart from the countless others vying for attention in the late 1930s. It was a unique and instantly recognizable style that would soon become synonymous with the Glenn Miller Orchestra. In a 1939 interview with Metronome magazine, Miller explained the key to his distinctive sound. "You'll notice today, some bands use the same trick on every introduction. Others repeat the same musical phrase as a modulation into a vocal. We're fortunate in that our style doesn't limit us to stereotyped intros, modulations, first choruses, endings, or even trick rhythms." He emphasized the role of the 5th saxophone player, who primarily played the clarinet, in creating this unique identity. The 5th sax, playing the clarinet most of the time, lets you know whose band you're listening to, and that's about all there is to it. In September 1938, the newly formed Glenn Miller Orchestra signed with Bluebird Records, a subsidiary of RCA Victor. This partnership, backed by businessman Cy Shribman, marked a significant turning point for Miller and his band. Their luck started to change in the spring of 1939 with a successful gig at the Meadowbrook Ballroom in New Jersey, followed by a major breakthrough at the Glen Island Casino in New Rochelle, New York. The band's performance at Glen Island drew a record-breaking crowd, signaling their growing popularity and the beginning of their meteoric rise to fame. By 1939, the Glenn Miller Orchestra was a household name. Their music filled jukeboxes across the country, with Time magazine noting that Miller's records were among the most popular in the nation. Their version of Tuxedo Junction, released in 1940, sold a whopping 115,000 copies in just 1 week, further cementing their status as a chart-topping sensation. Miller's success continued with a prestigious appearance at Carnegie Hall in October 1939, sharing the stage with other big band legends like Paul Whiteman, Benny Goodman, and Fred Waring. But the band's reach extended beyond live performances. From December 1939 to September 1942, they graced the airwaves with a weekly radio show sponsored by Chesterfield Cigarettes on CBS Radio. For the first 13 weeks, they even shared the spotlight with the popular Andrews Sisters, adding another layer of appeal to their broadcasts. In 1942, the Glenn Miller Orchestra reached a major milestone when they received the first-ever gold record for their hit song, Chattanooga Choo Choo. It was a monumental achievement, solidifying their place in music history and showcasing their immense popularity. The song featured the powerful vocals of Gordon Tex Beneke, Paula Kelly, and the Modernaires, along with Miller's signature sound. It was a catchy and upbeat tune that captured the spirit of the era and became a beloved classic. But the Glenn Miller Orchestra's talents weren't limited to music alone. They also made appearances in 2 20th Century Fox films, Sun Valley Serenade, 1941, and Orchestra Wives, 1942. In Sun Valley Serenade, they were a major part of the cast, sharing the screen with comedian Milton Berle and showcasing their musical talents in the show-stopping performance of Chattanooga Choo Choo. The band returned to Hollywood the following year for Orchestra Wives, a musical comedy drama that followed the lives of the musicians and their wives on tour. The film featured a young Jackie Gleason in a supporting role as the band's bassist, adding a touch of humor to the story. Although the band was contracted for a third film with Fox, their plans were interrupted by Miller's decision to enlist in the U.S. Army. The film, Blind Date, was never made, but the two films they did complete remain a testament to the Glenn Miller Orchestra's versatility and impact on popular culture. While the public adored Glenn Miller's music, many jazz critics weren't so impressed. They found his band's sound too polished and repetitive, lacking the spontaneity and improvisation of true jazz. Some critics even accused Miller of focusing too much on commercial success, sacrificing artistic integrity for popularity. Miller's response to these criticisms was simple and direct. "I don't want a jazz band." He knew what his audience wanted, and he delivered it with precision and consistency. But some critics, like Doug Ramsey, argued that Miller's formulaic approach lacked depth and originality. However, not all jazz critics dismissed Miller's music. Gunther Schuller and Gary Giddens defended him, arguing that his music had a unique appeal that resonated with audiences on a deep level. Giddens even compared Moonlight Serenade to a Pavlovian trigger, evoking an emotional response in listeners that few other songs could match. Schuller acknowledged that Miller's sound wasn't perfect, even criticizing the vocals of some of his singers, but he also recognized Miller's ambition and drive, suggesting that his musical legacy could have been even greater if not for his untimely death. The debate over Glenn Miller's musical contributions continues to this day. Some dismiss him as a commercial sellout, while others celebrate him as a visionary who revolutionized the big band sound. Regardless of one's opinion, there's no denying the impact he had on popular music and his enduring legacy as one of the most beloved band leaders of all time. In 1942, at the height of his civilian career, Glenn Miller made a surprising decision. He decided to join the armed forces. This meant giving up a massive income of $20,000 per week from his band, the equivalent of a staggering $330,000 per week today. It was a sacrifice for the sake of his country, a testament to his patriotism and dedication to the war effort. At 38 years old, married, and needing glasses, Miller was initially unlikely to be drafted. He first applied for a commission in the U.S. Navy, but his application was rejected due to a scandal involving celebrity commissions used to avoid the draft. This had nothing to do with Miller, but it still blocked his path to the Navy. Undeterred, Miller set his sights on the Army. He had already been in contact with Army officials, expressing his interest in modernizing military music and his desire to contribute to the war effort. His proposal to streamline modern military music caught the attention of General Brehon Somervell, who approved Miller's application for a commission. After settling his affairs, Miller bid farewell to his civilian career. His final commercial broadcast for Chesterfield cigarettes was a bittersweet moment as he handed over the reins to his competitor, Harry James, a gesture James never forgot. Miller's last civilian broadcast on the Blue Network Coca-Cola Victory Parade of Spotlight bands was also a poignant reminder of the life he was leaving behind. The Glenn Miller Orchestra's final performance at the Central Theater in Passaic, New Jersey, on September 27, 1942, marked the end of an era. On October 7, 1942, Glenn Miller reported for duty as a captain in the Army Specialist Corps at Omaha, Nebraska. After a month of training in Maryland, he was transferred to the Army Air Forces, AAF, by order of General Henry Harley, Hap Arnold. This was a big deal, as the AAF was a prestigious branch of the military, and Miller was eager to use his musical talents to serve his country. Initially, he was assigned to the AAF Southeast Flying Training Command in Alabama to learn about the training command's mission. During his time there, he made appearances on nationwide radio broadcasts, showcasing his musical abilities and boosting the morale of troops. In 1943, Miller was transferred to the headquarters of the AAF Technical Training Command, TTC, in North Carolina. He became the director of bands for the AAF TTC, responsible for overseeing the music programs at various AAF bases across the country. Miller also had the ambitious task of forming and directing the second AAF radio production unit and orchestra, which would be based in New York. This elite unit was a mix of talented jazz musicians from big bands and classically trained musicians from top orchestras. Miller aimed to blend jazz, popular music, and classical elements, including strings, to create a unique and innovative sound that would entertain and inspire both troops and civilians alike. The first AAF radio production unit and orchestra had already been established in Hollywood, but Miller's unit would bring a fresh sound and perspective to the airwaves. Glenn Miller's military service wasn't just about marching bands and patriotic tunes. He and his band took on a unique role in the war effort, broadcasting a weekly radio series called I Sustain the Wings. This show, aired on CBS and later NBC, entertained troops and civilians alike with a mix of jazz, popular music, and classical pieces. It was a hit, and the Miller Orchestra became the official voice of the Army Air Forces. But they didn't stop there. Miller's unit also recorded V-discs, special records for the troops, and produced broadcasts for the Office of War Information and Armed Forces Radio Service. They were using their musical talents to boost morale and spread a message of hope and unity during a time of conflict. The Glenn Miller AAF Training Command Band wasn't just a concert orchestra. It also had a marching band for military events and a jazz band led by the famous drummer and bandleader Ray McKinley. This diverse group of musicians was a testament to Miller's innovative approach to military music. In fact, Miller even got into a bit of a musical feud with the Army traditionalists. He dared to perform jazz arrangements of popular songs like the St. Louis Blues and Blues in the Night instead of the usual military marches. But the AAF recognized the power of Miller's music and endorsed his modern approach, allowing him to bring a fresh sound to the military music scene. In May 1944, General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself requested the transfer of Miller's unit to Europe for the purpose of radio broadcasting and boosting troop morale. With the D-Day invasion on the horizon, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAF, needed a top-notch band to entertain the troops and rally their spirits. Miller and his team accepted the mission, setting sail for London aboard the RMS Queen Elizabeth, which was being used as a troop transport. It was a new chapter for the band, one that would take them to the heart of the war effort and ultimately lead to a tragic ending. Upon arriving in London, Glenn Miller and his band were initially stationed in Chelsea at Sloane Court. However, due to the ongoing V-1 flying bomb attacks, the decision was made to relocate them to Bedford, where the BBC had previously moved its operations during the Blitz. This move was intended to provide a safer environment for the band, as Bedford was considered less vulnerable to the German bombs. However, fate had a cruel twist in store. On July 3rd, just a day after the band's scheduled move to Bedford, a V-1 bomb struck their former quarters in Chelsea, killing over 100 people. Thankfully, none of Miller's band members were harmed, as they had already relocated. This close call reinforced Miller's belief in his Miller luck, a sense that fate was on his side. On July 9th, the 51-piece orchestra began broadcasting a series of musical programs over the Allied Expeditionary Forces Program, AEFP, under the technical guidance of the BBC. These programs showcased the diverse talents of Miller's band, featuring everything from the full orchestra to jazz quartets and piano solos. The band also appeared on the Voice of America's European outlet, broadcasting to occupied Europe and Germany. One of their most interesting programs was Music for the Wehrmacht, a show specifically targeted at German soldiers. Miller himself made announcements in phonetic German, accompanied by a German-speaking announcer named Ilse, who was actually an American broadcaster named Gloria Wagner. Sergeant Johnny Desmond even sang vocals in German for this unique program. In England, the Glenn Miller Orchestra was in high demand. They performed at various American air bases, bringing a taste of home and a much-needed boost of morale to the troops. Their radio shows became even more popular with guest appearances from American celebrities like Bing Crosby and Dinah Shore. Shore even joined Miller for a recording session at the iconic Abbey Road Studios, where they recorded their German-language programs for broadcasting to enemy lines. The band's music was enjoyed by military personnel of all ranks, and their concert at 8th Air Force Headquarters was even filmed by the American Forces Network. General James H. Doolittle, the commander of the 8th Air Force, famously praised the band, saying, "Next to a letter from home, your band is the greatest morale booster in the European theater." It was a testament to the power of music to uplift spirits and unite people during times of war. In November 1944, Miller and his commanding officer, David Niven, received approval to move the band from England to France. They believed that Paris would provide a better location for their radio broadcasts and allow them to perform for wounded soldiers in hospitals and troops on leave from the front lines. However, before the move, they had to pre-record a massive 80 hours of broadcasts, a daunting task on top of their regular schedule. Meanwhile, preparations in France were lagging behind, causing frustration for Miller. To expedite the process, Niven ordered Miller to replace his executive officer, Lieutenant Donald Haynes, and fly ahead to Paris to finalize the arrangements. After completing their pre-recordings and broadcasts on December 12, 1944, the AAF band was ready to head to France. Miller had been booked on a flight from London to Paris on December 14th, but bad weather caused the flight to be cancelled. Much to Miller's frustration, he was eager to get his band to France and feared delays would jeopardize their performances. In a twist of fate, Miller learned from his colleague, Jerry Gray, that a mutual acquaintance, Lieutenant Colonel Norman Bassel, was flying to France on December 15th aboard a Nordeuin UC-64A Norseman. Bassel offered Miller a seat on the flight, and despite the fact that his travel orders didn't authorize him to fly on this type of plane, Miller accepted. This decision would prove to be fatal. Miller didn't inform his chain of command about the change in plans, leaving Schaff, the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, unaware of his whereabouts. On December 15th, the Norseman took off from RAF Twinwood Farm, with Bassel, Miller, and pilot John Stuart Morgan on board. The plane, however, never reached its destination and vanished without a trace. The next morning, the Battle of the Bulge erupted, and the chaos of war overshadowed the disappearance of a small plane and its 3 passengers. It wasn't until 3 days later, on December 18th, that the 8th Air Force and Schaff realized the UC-64 carrying Glenn Miller was missing. The disappearance of the beloved bandleader became a mystery that would baffle investigators for decades to come. The official explanation blames bad weather, which isn't surprising considering the dense fog and low cloud ceiling that had grounded flights for days. In France, the weather wasn't any better. Pilot John Morgan's requests to postpone the flight were denied by French air controllers due to poor visibility. However, according to some sources, Lieutenant Colonel Norman F. Bassel overruled the controllers and ordered Morgan to fly, ensuring Miller would reach Paris in time for his concert. Miller, already uneasy about flying, is said to have nervously asked, "Where the hell are the parachutes?" Bassel's response, "What's the matter, Miller? Do you want to live forever?" only added to the tension and foreshadowed the tragedy that would unfold. This fateful decision to fly despite the hazardous conditions has led to speculation about the real cause of the plane's disappearance. Adding to the mystery, there's evidence suggesting that pilot John Morgan might not have been fully qualified to fly the Norseman aircraft solely using instruments. This lack of expertise could have led to spatial disorientation, a dangerous condition where pilots lose their sense of direction and altitude, especially when flying through thick clouds. Spatial disorientation has been a common culprit in plane crashes, and according to flight simulations, a pilot has only 178 seconds to correct it before disaster strikes. This means Morgan may have had very little time to regain control of the aircraft once he became disoriented. Furthermore, the Norseman plane used in the 1940s was known to have carburetor issues, which could have caused engine failure. Combine that with the freezing temperatures at high altitudes, which could have led to ice forming on the wings, and it's easy to see how a combination of factors could have contributed to the plane's tragic demise. While the weather conditions certainly played a role in Glenn Miller's disappearance, a chilling theory suggests a more sinister fate: friendly fire. On that fateful day, a massive bombing raid over Germany was aborted due to heavy fog. As the Lancaster bombers returned from their aborted mission, they reached a point where they had to release their bombs over the designated jettison area in the English Channel. Navigator Fred Shaw, witnessing this spectacle for the first time, peered out of his window, his curiosity piqued. As he watched the bombs plummet towards the sea, something caught his eye in the periphery: a small plane flying 2,500 feet below the formation of Lancasters, heading south. Shaw watched in horror as the plane appeared to struggle, then suddenly flipped and plummeted into the channel. His bomb aimer also reported seeing the same thing, and the rear gunner shouted over the intercom, "There's a kite just gone in down under." But because they weren't in enemy territory, the crew wasn't debriefed upon their return, and the sighting went unreported. Years later, in 1956, Shaw watched the Glenn Miller story, and a chilling realization struck him. The plane he had seen crashing into the sea could have been the one carrying Glenn Miller. He checked his logbook and discovered the date and location matched up. But how could this have happened? It turns out that Miller's plane was likely following a common shuttle route used by the Allied forces to travel to France. This route brought him dangerously close to the South Jettison area, a no-fly zone for unauthorized aircraft. With pilot John Morgan's inexperience in instrument flying and the poor visibility due to the fog, it's possible that Miller's plane strayed off course, directly into the path of the returning bombers and their deadly cargo. While it remains a theory, the possibility of friendly fire adds another layer of tragedy to the mystery surrounding Glenn Miller's disappearance. While the theory of friendly fire seemed plausible, another Lancaster veteran on that raid, Roy Brown, has cast doubt on its credibility. He argued that Shaw's sighting was highly unlikely given the poor visibility and chaotic conditions of the mission. With over 100 aircraft involved and dense cloud cover, Brown believed it was nearly impossible for anyone to have accurately identified a small plane like Miller's from such a distance and with such limited visibility. Brown also pointed out the significant difference in altitude between the Lancasters and Miller's plane, making it improbable for a bomb to have struck it. An alternative theory, one that has captured the imaginations of conspiracy theorists and history buffs alike, suggests that Glenn Miller wasn't even on the fateful flight. German journalist Udo Ulfkotte made a shocking claim in 1997, alleging that he had discovered secret government documents revealing Miller's true demise. According to Ulfkotte, Miller didn't perish in a plane crash, but rather in a Paris brothel, succumbing to a heart attack in the arms of a prostitute. Ulfkotte, known for his controversial views and conspiracy theories, claimed to have stumbled upon these documents while researching a book on the BND, the German intelligence agency. He stated that the true circumstances of Miller's death were covered up to protect his reputation and maintain morale among the Allied troops. However, in the aftermath of his explosive interview with a German tabloid, Ulfkotte backtracked on his claims, stating that he had been misquoted and that he never actually possessed such documents. He revised his story, saying that an off-duty BND agent had shared this version of events with him. This retraction casts significant doubt on the validity of his original claims. While it is indeed curious that Miller's disappearance wasn't reported until 9 days after the alleged crash, there is no concrete evidence to support Ulfkotte's sensational claims. The theory of Miller dying in a brothel remains unsubstantiated, and the official explanation of his plane being lost in the English Channel remains the most likely scenario. Glenn Miller's life was not just about swing music and catchy tunes. There's a shadowy side to his story that suggests he may have been involved in something far more dangerous and secretive than anyone imagined. Could the beloved bandleader have been a spy working for the Allies during World War II? Miller's participation in counter-propaganda campaigns against the Nazis adds a layer of intrigue to this theory. He even spoke fluent German in some broadcasts, reaching out to German audiences with messages of hope and resistance. These broadcasts also featured actor David Niven, who was secretly part of Phantom, a special reconnaissance unit. It wasn't unusual for entertainers to be involved in covert operations during the war, using their fame and access to gather intelligence or spread propaganda. One intriguing theory suggests that Miller's mission in France was far more than just a concert. According to Dr. James B. Conant, a former U.S. ambassador, Miller was acting as a diplomat, tasked with meeting high-ranking German generals like Hermann Göring and Gerd von Rundstedt to negotiate a peace deal with the Allies. Conant even claims that Miller was authorized to offer sanctuary to Werner von Braun, the brilliant rocket scientist who later played a key role in the U.S. space program. This theory suggests that Miller's disappearance wasn't just a tragic accident, but a deliberate act of sabotage by the Nazis, who wanted to silence him and prevent any peace negotiations. It's a chilling possibility that adds a new dimension to Miller's legacy. Conant's theory suggests that the brothel story is linked to Miller's alleged mission. According to this narrative, Miller was secretly transported to a Parisian brothel, which was actually a front for Nazi operations. There, he was supposedly murdered while unconscious. While this tale is certainly a captivating one, it lacks substantial evidence. Apart from circumstantial accounts, there's little to support the claim that Miller was ever in a brothel or met such a gruesome end. One such account comes from an unidentified British soldier who claimed to have seen the body of an American officer being carried out of the brothel and loaded into an ambulance. He allegedly identified the deceased officer as Major Glenn Miller. However, this story has been dismissed by most as mere hearsay or a case of mistaken identity. In a promising development, new information has emerged that could potentially solve the mystery of Glenn Miller's disappearance. In January 2019, Rick Gillespie of TIGHAR, the International Group for Historic Aircraft Recovery, revealed that an English fisherman might have unknowingly stumbled upon the wreckage of Miller's plane in 1987. While trawling in the English Channel, the fisherman pulled up aircraft debris, but upon contacting the Coast Guard, was told to dispose of it if it was from World War II, as it might be a war grave. Years later, upon seeing a photograph of Miller's Norseman aircraft, the fisherman realized the significance of his discovery. He had noted the location where he had discarded the wreckage, providing a potential lead for investigators. Gillespie, who has extensive experience in aircraft recovery, believes this lead is credible. He points out that Miller's plane was the only Norseman of its kind to go missing during the war, making identification of the wreckage a straightforward process if found. This breakthrough could finally shed light on the circumstances surrounding Miller's disappearance and provide closure to a mystery that has endured for decades. While the investigation continues, the possibility of finding the wreckage and solving the mystery offers a glimmer of hope for history enthusiasts and fans of Glenn Miller's music. Until then, the story of his disappearance remains a captivating enigma, leaving us to speculate and wonder about the fate of the legendary bandleader. On March 23, 1945, a solemn ceremony was held at Glenn Miller's New York office, where his wife, Helen Miller, accepted his posthumous Bronze Star Medal. It was a poignant moment, a public acknowledgement of Miller's service and sacrifice during the war. Later that year, when Miller was officially declared dead, Helen received a formal letter of condolence and appreciation from General H.H. Arnold, the commanding general of the Army Air Forces. It was a gesture that recognized Miller's significant contributions to the war effort and offered comfort to his grieving family. Major General Anderson, who had been involved in the investigation of Miller's disappearance, personally visited Helen and shared the official findings. On January 20, 1945, an 8th Air Force Board of Inquiry concluded that the UC-64 aircraft had gone down over the English Channel due to a combination of factors, including human error, mechanical failure, and adverse weather conditions.